breaking news this Sunday night. France's surprise election call.
J'ai décidé de vous redonner le choix de notre.
I've decided to give you back the choice.
Why Emmanuel Macron made the sudden decision, plus the gains right-wing parties are making in tonight's EU parliamentary elections. A piece of Toronto's history destroyed.
It does look like it's a total, complete loss.
Fire ravages a landmark church.
It's a bit overwhelming right now.
Controversial tax hike on capital gains, the political gamble that could alienate investors and business owners. And the LGBTQ purge.
When I was kicked out, I knew that it was wrong.
Recognizing and remembering a shameful part of Canada's history.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news. French President Emmanuel Macron has called a snap National Assembly election after his party suffered a heavy defeat to the far right in the European Parliament election. Millions of people across the EU have been casting ballots in one of the world's biggest democratic votes. Our Redmond Shannon is tracking the developments in London. And Redmond, it looks like projections are showing the centre-right and far-right have made gains.
Yes, Nitu, these European gains for the far right are not exactly shocking. Anti-immigration and populist parties have been making gains in recent years. But Emmanuel Macron's reaction to the French result has surprised many. A huge win for the far-right National Rally in France, easily beating the centrists of President Emmanuel Macron.
Je dissous donc ce soir l'Assemblée nationale.
A defeat so stark that the French president immediately called national parliamentary elections to be held just weeks from now.
Nous sommes prêts à exercer le pouvoir.
National Rally leader Marine Le Pen told supporters her party is ready to take power if the people decide. Even if Macron lost control of the National Assembly, he would remain as president. The rightward shift replicated across many countries in the European Parliament elections. The far-right AfD party finished second in Germany. That despite it being kicked out of its European parliamentary group after a candidate recently said members of the Nazi SS paramilitary force were not all criminals. Anti-immigrant parties also making gains in Austria and the Netherlands.
It's one of the major issues in the Dutch politics today. What direction will we go when it comes to our border and immigration and asylum policy, you know?
Political parties from each member nation choose to align with one of the 7 groupings within the parliament. Since 2019, the centre-right EPP has been the biggest group. This time it and the 2 groupings to its right have made gains. Across the 27 European Union countries, voter turnout tends to be lower than for national elections. The Strasbourg and Brussels-based parliament passes legislation on a limited number of areas, such as technology, the environment and human rights. Opinion polling this year suggested that those who did vote were motivated by inflation, the war in Ukraine and immigration. Foreseeing this shift to the right, the European Parliament approved an overhaul of its migration and asylum rules in April. In 2023, the EU saw the highest number of undocumented arrivals since 2016, although the vast majority of immigrants currently in Europe have arrived through legal means. And tonight, Belgium's centrist Prime Minister resigned after poor results in today's combined national and European elections there. However, despite the shift to the right across much of Europe, it should be noted that the 2 biggest blocs in the European Parliament remain the centre-right and the centre-left. Nitu?
All right, Redmond Shannon in London tonight. Thanks for that, Redmond. Toronto has experienced a major loss of history and culture after St. Anne's Anglican Church went up in flames. The nearly 120-year-old building, a National Historic Site, also contained priceless artwork from some of Canada's most renowned painters. Now it's completely in ruins. Caryn Lieberman looks at the devastating impact on the community.
To come on Sunday morning to find that everything you worked so hard for and done so much for gone in a matter of an hour. That's where my heart is right now. I'm crushed.
An historic church in the West End of Toronto destroyed by fire.
Flames tore through the two-story century-old brick building in minutes.
Certainly a large portion of the roof has already fallen in, and given the heat, given the age of the building, given the water volume, it is probable that we will have further collapses.
Designated a National Historic Site in the late 90s because of its vibrant paintings, St. Anne's Anglican Church was known for its artwork, architecture, and design. It was one of a kind in Canada.
It was one of the rare Anglican churches that was in the Byzantine style, an Eastern Christian style. So it had a real profound symbol to it in the sense that it was a church for all.
Murals painted by prominent Canadian artists, including the only religious works by 3 members of the Group of 7, the focus of guided and virtual tours. Art that is invaluable and irreplaceable.
Judging by the condition of the building at this point in time, it's highly unlikely that there's anything that we can save inside the building.
The fire started just a few hours before Sunday services. No one was inside the church, and the cause is under investigation.
This is a place that has provided support, a home, love, brought people from the community together.
It's a piece of Canadian history, and now to see it burn down, I was akin it to is this our Notre Dame?
Referring to Paris's soaring Notre Dame Cathedral, ravaged by fire in 2019. It's being rebuilt, and there's early indications St. Anne's will be too.
This is going to be a tremendous loss for the community, but it's not over because we will rebuild.
Though rebuilding could never bring back the artwork that was lost. Caryn Lieberman, Global News.
Toronto police say several people were arrested today in clashes between officers and pro-Palestinian protesters. The annual Walk with Israel event drew heightened security and protests along the 5-kilometer walk, the largest Jewish community event in Canada. Tens of thousands of people showed up for the event, including some people whose family members were taken hostage by Hamas. We are learning more about the Israeli operation that rescued 4 Israeli hostages yesterday and the toll it took in Gaza. And a warning, you may find some of the images disturbing. The Hamas-run health ministry says at least 274 Palestinians were killed and about 700 injured in the Israeli air and ground raid. The IDF disputes those numbers. Military officials say forces had to enter civilian areas in the Nuseirat camp to reach the hostages. They were held in 2 separate apartments. The raid took place mid-morning while the streets were teeming with people.
Again, bombing everywhere and the airstrikes were everywhere. The people were running in fear and a lot of horrible things are going on the streets. I hope that a human person, a human leaders will interfere to cease fire soon.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will return to the Middle East this week to push for a breakthrough on a ceasefire proposal. And one day after those hostages were freed, Israel's war cabinet minister has quit. Benny Gantz says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is blocking Israel's path to defeating Hamas and needs to call an election. Last month, Gantz gave Netanyahu an ultimatum to create a post-war plan for Gaza or else he would resign. Netanyahu, for his part, called on Gantz today not to, quote, abandon the front. Ukrainian forces claim to have struck one of Russia's most advanced stealth fighters for the first time. Ukraine's intelligence agency says they had bombed an airfield in southern Russia, including a Su-57 jet. Satellite photos seemingly show the strike's aftermath, with the plane badly damaged. Su-57s are 5th-generation fighters. Russia has only made a few dozen that have never flown in combat. If the aircraft was destroyed, it would mark the first combat loss of its kind. After wrapping up a 5-day visit to France, U.S. President Joe Biden has reached an agreement with French President Emmanuel Macron on using profits of frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. There were no additional details, but it comes as part of a released roadmap between both countries over their continued support for Ukraine. Around $380 billion of Russian central bank funds are frozen worldwide due to Moscow's invasion. Their profits generate $5 billion each year. The federal government is ready to proceed with a controversial tax hike it announced in the April budget. It applies to capital gains above $250,000. Capital gains are the profit made on the sale of stocks, investment properties, or a business. Some professionals, like doctors and lawyers, are against the hike, citing retirement planning concerns. But as our chief political correspondent David Akin reports, the Liberals may be more interested in scoring political points over the opposition.
Today, I'm going to talk about taxes.
And Chrystia Freeland did, repeating the budget commitment to raise more than $19 billion over 5 years by boosting the capital gains taxes. She says only a small number of wealthy Canadians, maybe 40,000 or so, pay when they sell an investment. The tax hike could have been in the budget bill, but the Liberals carved it out for separate legislative treatment beginning Monday in the House of Commons in the hope of scoring some political points against their chief rivals, the Conservatives.
This week will be an important political moment for our democracy. It will be a moment when Canadians will be able to see what each one of their members of Parliament believes in and stands for.
For months now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been carefully cultivating a blue-collar image, spending most of his weekends visiting shop floors and work sites across the country. He wants to be seen as a man of the so-called common people, and the Liberals want to turn that narrative on its head. The Conservatives, though, are playing coy and have not tipped their hand on how they'll vote on this tax hike. Meanwhile, the Liberals may have created new enemies. The country's doctors, lawyers, and other professionals are furious with the changes, saying that now, when they sell their practices at the end of their working lives, the government will be taking a much bigger chunk of their retirement nest egg.
We're trying to hold up a healthcare system that's crumbling around us. We really cannot introduce new reasons for physicians to scale back their practice, particularly community family medicine practice. It's simply the wrong move.
In any event, the measure is certain to pass since the minority Liberals can count on the support of NDP MPs to hike capital gains taxes. What is not certain, whether the Liberals will earn a political dividend from this move. Neetu.
Thanks, David. Roaring Kitty re-emerges. Coming up, the familiar face is back, igniting market movement and regulatory interest. A troubling development out of Sudan. The main hospital in the city of Al Fasher has been attacked and put out of service. A volunteer group at the hospital says fighters with the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, killed and injured several people during the raid. The RSF has been at war with the Sudanese army in the region. Doctors Without Borders says this was the only hospital in the city capable of dealing with mass casualty events that are happening daily during the civil war. Narendra Modi has been sworn in for a rare third term as India's Prime Minister. Modi and his cabinet ministers took their oaths in New Delhi today. The 73-year-old is just the second leader in India's history to win 3 consecutive terms. Modi's party cruised to landslide victories in 2014 and 2019, but it had to form a coalition to stay in power after failing to secure a majority in this year's election. After years of silence, Roaring Kitty has roared back online. That's the investment influencer who back in 2021 helped propel shares of the video game retailer GameStop as much as 2,000%. The stock surged again after his reappearance last Monday, then plummeted by Friday. Now the Massachusetts securities regulator is investigating his trading activities. Anne Gaviola looks at the questions about whether what Roaring Kitty is doing is legal.
Surprise! GameStop's up about 5x from when I uploaded those videos.
Keith Gill, aka Roaring Kitty, kickstarted the meme stock craze 3 years ago, sending the price of GameStop, AMC, BlackBerry soaring. The Massachusetts resident and his army of retail investors took to social media and with online chatter and memes brought major hedge funds to their knees and made lots of money.
I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't.
Roaring Kitty is back after a years-long hiatus with a live stream on Friday, back on social media, sending share prices on a roller coaster, prompting U.S. regulators to ponder, is what he's doing market manipulation?
Certainly smells like manipulation.
Stock manipulation involves spreading false or misleading information about a company, engaging in transactions to make a stock look like it's more actively traded than it actually is, rigging quotes, prices, or trades.
I started my career as an equities trader at JP Morgan.
Personal finance expert Vivian Tu says Roaring Kitty is doing what Wall Streeters do.
It happens all the time. It's essentially called talking your book.
Are Roaring Kitty's antics any different than U.S. host Jim Cramer using his massive platform to talk about stock picks?
Welcome to Cramerica!
Or revered investing guru Warren Buffett, highlighting the need for new rules that take into account what happens on social media.
We're moving into a world where AI is going to be increasingly out there. And then we've also all seen the impact of fake news. So there's a lot of new risks that are in the market right now.
No easy feat regulating memes, though. Roaring Kitty inspired a Hollywood movie and Netflix documentary, but riding the wave of meme stocks can result in quick gains or losses.
I am a much more, loud proponent of investing in index funds, having a diversified portfolio of, risk-appropriate investments.
Personal finance experts say a less exciting strategy is appropriate for most. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, the reaction as Nova Scotia becomes the latest Canadian province to ban cell phone use in public school classrooms. Leave your phone alone. That message is becoming more common in classrooms across Canada as Nova Scotia joins 4 other provinces in restricting the devices at school. Heidi Petracek breaks down the rules and dials up reaction from students and experts.
Students at this Halifax area school already know what it's like to be without their devices.
Students are not on their phones all the time, and students can actually listen to what they're doing in class.
Clayton Park Junior High went cell phone free this past year. And now so will all Nova Scotia public schools when classes start back up in the fall.
Every student will be required to have their cell phones turned off and stored out of sight during instructional time.
Elementary students will have to put their phones away the entire day. Older kids may be able to use them during breaks depending on their school's rules. Nova Scotia is the 5th province to take this step. Similar rules were introduced in New Brunswick last month. Both join existing bans in BC, Quebec, and Ontario.
Every parent and teacher we speak to has shared the growing problem of cell phone distractions in class.
Ontario tightened its restrictions in April, blocking access to all social media platforms on school devices, a move the principal back at Clayton Park Junior High relates to.
Every time that we looked at an incident, both in the classroom or on the school grounds, it always stemmed from social media.
Cell phones are damaging. They undermine attention, concentration, and memory.
While devices can be useful, registered psychologist Simon Sherry says limiting time spent on them is a must.
What we're seeing among our youth is 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day phone use on average, and nobody would suggest that much phone use is a good thing.
The next step for educators, make sure parents are on board with the bans to help teachers enforce the new rules next school year. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Next, as Pride festivities start, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights delves into a somber chapter of the country's history. June is Pride Month, a time when the LGBTQ2 community celebrates its culture and identity and promotes the fight for acceptance. It also means recognizing a painful journey and the discrimination they faced. Now the Canadian Museum of Human Rights has unveiled an exhibit about the LGBTQ purge. As Melissa Ridgen explains, it was one of the longest violations of human rights in any Canadian workforce.
It's a beautiful building that houses some of the ugliest parts of our collective history. For Pride Month, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is honoring those who endured what's known as the LGBTQ purge, an era when federal government employees were targeted and often fired for their sexual orientation.
There's so many of these stories, I think, in our families, in our communities, that have yet to be told, and museums give us an opportunity to do that, and opening these conversations amongst our friends and family also get that.
Todd Ross was forced out of the Navy with an honorable discharge in 1990.
Thinking back to when I was kicked out, I knew that it was wrong.
He filed Freedom of Information requests that showed he was being discriminated against for his sexual orientation. Michelle Douglas was an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces in the mid-1980s when she too was investigated.
Because I fell in love during that time with a fellow officer who happened to be a woman, I came under interrogation by military police for many days.
Like Ross, Douglas was also honorably discharged but refused to accept that without a fight. Douglas launched a landmark legal challenge to end the LGBTQ purge back in 1992. Decades later, justice and a long-awaited apology.
A purge that lasted decades will forever remain a tragic act of discrimination suffered by Canadian citizens at the hands of their own government.
The Canadian government settled a class action lawsuit for $145 million in 2018. Those funds are now being used to repay damages to survivors and to memorialize the historical discrimination against LGBTQ Canadians from that era. While the purge is over, survivor Martine Roy says new battles, from fights over rainbow sidewalks to the backlash on trans rights, will continue.
There's a lot of things that we can do, and one of them is to be not pessimistic. To the contrary, we have to gather, we have to be optimists, we have to say we know how to fight. We did it before. Let's do it again.
She hopes activists remember that and find strength in their roots. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. We'll stick with the Pride theme for tonight's Your Canada with this double rainbow during a stormy day in Osoyoos, British Columbia. Thanks so much for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.